Tonight's devotional is one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. It's the story of Joseph. Because Abraham trusted God, he became God's friend. Because Abraham's son Isaac trusted God, he became God's friend too. Then Isaac had a son named Jacob, who, you guessed it, learned from his father to trust God. Then Jacob had a son, and then Jacob had another son, and another, and another. Jacob had 12 sons in all. Their names were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Of all Jacob's sons, Joseph was his favorite. Jacob wanted Joseph to know that he was his dad's favorite, so he gave Joseph a special coat made of all the colors of the rainbow. This annoyed his older brothers. Why didn't they get their special coats? To make matters worse, Joseph told his older brothers about dreams he was having. In his dreams, Joseph saw himself ruling over his brothers. He saw his brothers bowing down to him. Hearing about Joseph's dreams made his older brothers really annoyed and really jealous. So much so that they decided they'd be happier if Joseph wasn't around anymore. So one day, when their dad wasn't with them, they picked Joseph up and threw him in a hole in the ground. They were just going to leave him there forever until they got another idea. Have you ever gotten so mad at your brother or sister that you wanted to sell him to the circus? Well, Joseph's brothers actually did, except not to the circus. They sold Joseph to some folks traveling to Egypt, who sold Joseph again when they got to Egypt. Now Joseph has been thrown in a hole and sold twice. What a lousy week. In Egypt, Joseph worked for a very wealthy man. Joseph was honest and hardworking, and the wealthy man liked him. But the man's wife told a lie about him, and Joseph went to prison. Now Joseph has been thrown in a hole, sold twice, and sent to prison. Why would God let all that happen to Jacob's favorite son? Wasn't Jacob a friend of God? Joseph could have gotten mad and decided that he didn't want to be God's friend anymore. But he didn't. He still prayed to God, and he still tried hard to do the right thing. And God had a plan for Joseph. While in prison, Joseph told two of the men there the meaning of their crazy dreams. God showed Joseph what the dreams meant. A few years later, Pharaoh, the king of all of Egypt, also had a crazy dream. He'd heard about a guy named Joseph who could interpret dreams. Pharaoh called Joseph out of prison and told him the dream. Once again, God gave Joseph the meaning. The dream, Joseph said, was a warning. For 7 years, Egypt would grow lots and lots of food, more than they could eat. But then for 7 years after that, they would experience a famine, when no food would grow at all. If the Egyptians didn't store up all the extra food during the first 7 years, they wouldn't have enough to eat during the famine, and many people would die. Pharaoh was so happy that he made Joseph the second most powerful person in Egypt. He put him in charge of all the food. Joseph made sure they would have enough to eat when things got tough. When food stopped growing in Egypt, it also stopped growing where Joseph's family lived. They were really hungry, so hungry that they traveled all the way to Egypt to see if they could find food there. And sure enough, not only did they find plenty of food in Egypt, but they also found their brother Joseph. They thought Joseph would be mad at them, but he wasn't. Why wasn't Joseph mad? Because he could see God's plan. If Joseph hadn't been thrown in a hole, sold twice, and then sent to prison, Egypt would have run out of food and many, many people would have died. Joseph's family would have run out of food and they would have died. God used something very bad, the way his brothers treated him, to do something very good, to save Joseph's whole family. Joseph learned that God can use anything, no matter how bad, to do something good. That reminds me a little bit of what we talked about in Sunday school this week. All right, our everyday truth. When I trust God, he uses the hard parts of my story for my good and his glory. Okay, here are your questions to talk about with your parents. Why wasn't Joseph mad at his brothers for selling him to be a slave in Egypt? Pause the video and talk about it. What can God do with the bad things that happen to us? Pause the video and talk about it. Okay, ready to join me in prayer? Dear God, we believe you can use our hard days to do something good. Help us to stay positive as we trust you. Amen. All right, I'll see you tomorrow night for a bedtime story.